Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I work within the Thought Leadership and Analytics part of the organisation. I've been with RICS for over 13 years now, and my role is to look at the impact of AI, data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 130,000 members working worldwide, working right across that property life cycle through land use itself, planning and development, construction, brokerage, valuation, building operation, commercial property, residential property, all the different asset types, building, surveying, infrastructure. It's really a very broad and deep canvas upon which data and technology is having a huge effect. And I'm really pleased today to have Gwilym Lewis join me from Loxada. So welcome to the discussion, Gwilym.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's good to be here.
Pleasure. And it's always nice, before we get into the bits and bytes, and I know we discussed about not getting too deep in the bits and bytes, but it's always nice to have a bit of a kind of a backstory from your perspective in terms of your route into this particular firm and the kind of origin story of Loxada.
Absolutely. Interestingly, possibly for someone who's now in technology, I actually started my career working for a large London residential letting agency, so working in the commercial and residential letting side. So I understand a bit about the world that we're talking about now from an executional point of view rather than a pure technology point of view. But that was well over 30 years ago, so I know things have moved on slightly. I'm a non-technologist that works in technology companies. I've worked within the cybersecurity field for well over the past decade, and prior to that worked running a software development company that built very secure software. The route to where it took me now and what we do with Loxada is looking at how one can make cybersecurity as simple as possible for end users. At Loxada, we help people be more secure when they're working from home by sending them a router, a box that gives them a secure network. And our ethos is very much around demystifying and simplifying something that can be a very confusing subject, and where there are a lot of nicely snake oil salesmen trying to sell solutions that people don't necessarily need.
Yeah, and I guess as ever, the reason we have these kind of video discussions, it's probably a bit inaccurate to call it a fireside chat in fairly sunny late August in the UK. But I guess for me that the interesting context here is that, like so many things, the pandemic and that kind of acceleration of trends has really, in many kind of parts of the world, really accelerated this kind of working from home, hybrid working. And I guess as ever, for me, data and technology is not so much about the bits and bytes and the technical side, but it's the kind of value it brings and the problem it solves. So, from your perspective, why are we having this chat? What really has changed in the last few years, and what kind of challenges are occupiers and employers really facing now in this very, very, very different world of so many people like myself at the moment working from home?
I think it's a really interesting question, and so the kind of why. Obviously, two things have changed. One is that it's now very, very normal for people to formally work from home. And if you think pre-pandemic, pretty much all of us worked from home maybe one day a week or did an afternoon or something like that. But it was kind of with some tacit approval rather than it was explicitly something that people did, and therefore explicitly a risk they needed to deal with. And the second thing is because there's such a volume of people working from home, it's become a more interesting space for people to target, people being threat actors or attackers. We'll call them attackers from now on. And so the world has changed, as you say, because there are more people and therefore there are more people attacking. Why is that relevant? It's because we tend to behave differently when we're not in a formal office environment. And therefore, we are more at risk than we would be sitting at work. And that, coupled with, for most people, when they're working from home, or even a lot of the time in kind of like co-location, shared networking kind of spaces, we don't know from a technology point of view what the technology around people working from home is. So it's a bit of a black hole, for want of a better description. I'm sitting working from home here, and my IT department, if I wasn't working for the company that I do, I wouldn't really know what was around me. And that's a risk because it's a known unknown. We don't know what's going on, and that's risky.
And I suppose, I mean, I'm going to almost try and play the layman here, because I obviously do have a degree of IT knowledge and awareness over the years. But I mean, you know, I sit in my home office and I think, okay, what's kind of connected to me? And you know, I'm obviously using a home router to access broadband, and I'm piggybacking on that with my, you know, my corporate equipment. But I'm thinking almost now, well, what else is connected? One of my kids has got one of those. I don't know, it's Siri or whatever, one of those things that you can talk to and ask it to do stuff. And we've got home entertainment stuff that, for better or for worse, seems to need to be connected to the internet for various reasons. You know, we haven't got necessarily some of these kind of home controlling things like a Nest or whatever, or Ring doorbell, but you know, we've certainly got a number of devices that are plugged in, as well as other mobile phones and other people's laptops and stuff like that. I mean, how much damage? I mean, you know, I haven't got a toaster, but you know, how much damage can these devices? And as you know better than I do, there is an increasing trend for devices to be connected to the internet, whether it's your fridge or whatever. And you know, whether we need that or not is a debatable point. But I mean, how much damage can these devices do, or is it about the router? What's the kind of threat landscape? Because obviously there's actors trying to get in potentially, but
Yeah,
what
and
are
I
the
think
threats?
no, I think that's really interesting. There's a couple of points you touched on that I'll address, but I would say, by the way, I don't think there's any need for anyone's fridge ever to be connected to the internet. Yeah. However, the media would have us believe that the threat is from TVs, fridges, toasters
Yeah,
going rogue. Yeah. And somehow that's going to compromise people, and it's going to be and terrible. And there is kind of a marginal threat for that sort of thing happening, but typically that's people hijacking toasters. I think there are online toasters to use them to attack other people. Where the
yeah,
threat really exists is from other people's devices connected to one's home network that are unknowingly, most of the time, being controlled by an attacker, and they are using those devices to probe and see what's happening on the network that they're connected to. So you mentioned, for instance, that your kids have got a Siri device. You also mentioned other people's laptops, connecting to your home network. Because the first thing that happens whenever anyone walks into someone's home after they've exchanged pleasantries is they say, "What's the Wi-Fi password?"
yeah.
So we lose track of the devices that are connected to our network. And 99% of the time, that's probably not going to be a problem. But what we don't know about the devices that are connected to our network is what those devices have done in the past. So, has someone discovered a wonderful free game that they've downloaded, they've installed onto their computer, and their laptop is now a tool that is being used to attack other things that are around them. So the risk becomes you're connected to your home network. You have your corporate devices. You have a VPN that's running from your corporate device back into your corporate network. And so you're protected with stuff kind of leaving your device. But what you're not protected from is all the random stuff that you know nothing about around you. Yeah? And it's really important to remember that the majority of attacks are not some hooded figure sitting somewhere, maliciously, nefariously, and very actively saying, "Oh, I'm
Yeah,
connected to this laptop. I'm going to do something." They're automated. The software that runs in the background. So someone's infected device that's on your home network is just automatically seeing if it can do something else. And so back to the risk is we don't know what's there. We do know that there's lots of stuff that's potentially connected. I think Deloitte did a study recently, and they were on average 20 devices connected to a home network. The reality is it's actually a lot higher than that. And each one of those things are outside of our control as an organization, and therefore a risk. Does that kind of answer the question?
yeah, and I suppose from a kind of an elevating it into something that we should be concerned and address. I mean, what kind of attacks are you seeing? What kind of real world issues are actually happening? What sort of things are your clients reporting that actually they've been affected by, despite the fact they may have thought, well, actually, we have got this controlled. We don't see it as a big issue. What sort of things are happening in the real world?
So what one tends to happen, and I got it with a wry smile. Of course, our clients don't have the issue because they use what we do. But joking aside, the kind of the real world attacks are the propagation of specifically of malware within personal in people's networks, and
Right.
particularly with work devices or organisations that are allow BYOD, bring your own device to work.
Right.
So if one configures one's IT correctly, one's IT is never going to be at risk. Yeah. Unfortunately, to err is human. Yeah. And so that doesn't happen in most organizations. And so what we see is, as a for instance, people have company devices that are pretty well secured, pretty well locked down, but when they connect to a home network, the network setting automatically says, I'm in a trusted network, i.e. I'm at home, it's all fine. And they then are attacked sideways by someone, the kids' scroty mates turning up that sometimes do actually want to be hackers and propagating malware, which then hits their device, and then their device is securely connected to their work network, and their device is a trusted device in their network. And now whatever's hit here now heads back into the network because it's coming from a trusted source.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the kind of bring your own device. I mean, do you see that as a much more vulnerable situation to be in compared to using a device where you're effectively already to some extent locked down in terms of the apps you can use and the sites you can access and the kind of control? Is there a big differentiator between that, bring your own device and using a corporate laptop, for example?
Absolutely, and I think that's a very good question, and leads to a very I mean, it's the chat that we don't typically as users lock our own devices down. So bring your own device becomes very problematic because unless you're a slightly paranoid security geek like me, the chances are that you haven't got a separate administration account and user account on your personal laptop.
Yeah.
Because kind of why would you? And the answer is because you should. And so devices that are outside a company's control don't typically then have the security configurations or the security setup or even some of the basic security measures that they really should. Companies can definitely mitigate this by adding software that's corporate software that potentially creates a walled garden where data sets and that sort of thing. But it's very, very difficult to police because obviously you're then as an IT department saying, Andrew, I see that you've got a Linux laptop, being kind of techie, something that people don't use. We don't actually support that. So, okay, you just do your own thing, or you're not allowed to bring your own device. So it's a long-winded way of saying massively, because you're now adding the next layer of stuff that's out of control from an IT department's point of view. What we should remember as part of this is that even organizations that don't necessarily allow bring your own device or provide people with company laptops and don't kind of think about bring your own device often overlook the fact that one's mobile phone is also connecting to corporate data. One's iPad is, or that files are being shared back and forth and that sort of thing. Because it's like, hold on, I've got to send the laptop in to be repaired at the moment. I'll just transfer stuff here, or I'm sitting watching TV. It's easier to do this on your phone. So there needs to be a level of kind of control that happens for all devices, even if you think you don't have a bring your own device policy.
And I suppose in a similar way, the kind of trend towards increasing cloud-based, service software as a service means that quite often, even without working from home, you've got this issue where people are accessing effectively corporate systems almost from any device anywhere.
Absolutely, and I think the interesting thing with cloud-based systems is they're generally very, very good at protecting against unauthorized access, and more so than corporate systems generally. So there is a reality. I'll rephrase that. There's a myth that's perpetuated, and I think COVID changed this hopefully for the better, that things that are cloud-based are less secure or more problematic to maintain because you don't have control. The flip is that cloud-based systems and good cloud suppliers have massive security measures and security teams that look after data, because the last thing they want you to do is your data to go missing, because then obviously they're going to be out of business. So yes, cloud-based systems do present a risk in that you can access them from everywhere, but the risk comes from back to where are you accessing from and what's around you. So being aware of your surroundings. And remember, to your starting point about not being too technical, being aware of your surroundings is not just what network am I connecting to and is it secure, but it's also who's standing behind me, looking over my shoulder,
Yeah, it's
or
shoulder
when I
surfing.
get
Yeah.
up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or when I get up to go to the toilet, or I go to get a glass of water, do I lock my laptop down? Yeah, and so there's, it's that when you're working remotely, it's not just what do I need to be aware of from a technical point of view. It's you need to be more vigilant. I was going to say
Yeah.
hyper vigilant, but that's unfair.
Yeah.
But you just need to be more vigilant and get into the habit of certain behaviours that reduce risk.
And I guess from what we've discussed so far, to summarize, the risks we run are that effectively, a home worker could end up as being a backdoor for the when I say normal, horrible phrase to use, but the kind of malware, ransom type, denial of service type attack, any kind of attack could arguably use the home working scenario as a backdoor in.
Absolutely, and I would say, but I would say home or remote working, because remember we connect to coffee shops and where we literally don't know what the network is. Yeah. And it's something that tends to be overlooked because there is a focus on how do I ensure data from my device going somewhere else is secure, and not what else is around me. And it is actually an easily solvable problem, and it's about people being more aware. It's about people, you mentioned earlier, your home router, ensuring that their home router software is updated. It's about companies keeping more of a track on what are happening when people are working remotely, which doesn't have to be an onerous task, but should be done. And then finally, it's about understanding that it is a risk that needs to be considered within an organization. It needs to be in the risk register. It needs to be something that is discussed. Now, it may be that as an organization, you choose to do nothing about it, but unless somebody asks the question, are we thinking about this? There is an explicit assumption that somebody else is doing something about it. So the key thing is saying, have we considered this as a risk? Is it something that worries us? Is it something that should worry us? And if the answer is yes, then what can we do about it?
And I guess at the risk of not getting too deep into the bits and bytes, am I correct in saying that simply having a VPN is really not a panacea in this kind of situation, and that doesn't necessarily cover all the bases in terms of protecting and addressing these kind of risks?
Absolutely. I mean, in kind of, to continue the vein of in simple terms, a VPN is like having a security guard pick up stuff from the front of your building and deliver it to the place that it needs to go to. What it doesn't protect against is everyone else in the same building, stealing stuff from your desk. But because one has a security guard, one assumes that the entire building is secure and forgets that there's lots of other people around you. And this is particularly relevant for like shared net, spaces like RICS and places like that, where you're in an office and you're paying for an office, but you're connecting to their network and you literally have no idea who's sitting next door to you. Or when you're working from home and back to your kids' scroty mates who've watched Mr. Robot and have decided that they want to be a hacker and are now actively trying to do something, or your kids have just innocuously downloaded something, and it turns out that they probably shouldn't have gone for the free version of Call of Duty because it's not what it says it is.
So I guess to cut to the chase to some extent, we've obviously got currently an array of approaches, some of them are kind of behavioral and cultural, and we've got things like VPNs, and obviously we've got antivirus, and obviously if it's not bring your own device, your corporate device is going to be locked down to an extent. As you said, you're not going to have admin access, so you're not going to be sitting there hopefully as an admin level user with that kind of vulnerability. So what can we do? What sort of hardware or software is out there to kind of help with this kind of problem that arguably is only going to increase in scope as we have more and more people working from home, and unfortunately bad actors will continue to probe for avenues in?
So I think there's a number of things. One is, and it's a mantra that you hear from all security professionals, that ensuring software is up to date, and specifically when one is working from home, that one's router software is up to date. A simple solution, but one that's difficult to police, is most home routers allow for a guest network to be set up. So as an organization, you could require or suggest that your teams working from home set up a separate network that's called ABC Surveyors Remote Working Network on each of their routers. there's a key thing around IT departments and IT teams ensuring that devices are properly configured, because there's an assumption that they are, but people are busy, and sort of the final device configuration piece goes away there. And then there is, I think the final thing is educating people to be clear that there is a risk that they face, and to think in terms, to be a little bit paranoid whilst they're in the office. And then there are solutions. So obviously, we offer one, which is a set of routers that sit in people's homes that take away most of this pain. Cisco have a service. There's a company called Juniper Networks, or a big technology company, that do the same sort of thing, and they work very, very well because they're kind of fire and forget. But for many organisations, that's not an appropriate thing because they're not big enough, or they've got other things to worry about. So, in simple terms, make sure that people's routers are up to date. Make sure that when you think you've configured people's security software on their devices, that you have actually done that and you have a modicum of control over it, and then educate people on what they need to be aware of. And then finally, if you can get people to set up a separate guest network at home so that they only connect to this, by not allowing other people to be on the same network, you effectively remove 90%, 95% of the risk, working on the premise that 20 devices on each network, that you face from lateral threats. And then it becomes one less thing to worry about.
Yeah. So I guess in summary, for our members, many of which who are in that kind of operational role of running buildings and from an occupier management perspective and workplace management, are obviously now living with this new normal of a much more, as you say, as we discussed early on, it's become something that was an ad hoc activity to something which is much more structured in many ways and more formal and higher in volume. I guess from their point of view, you've already mentioned the risk register, but I guess it is a change in thinking about what it means to think about cybersecurity when you have effectively virtual floors now. You have virtual floors of people where, as you say, they could be at home in a coffee shop, at a Regis, at an airport lounge. I suppose what would your message be to sort of our members who are running these kind of occupier buildings and having to think about that virtual footprint now?
I'm smiling because this may not be an appropriate answer, but don't believe anyone that tells you it's not possible to make that sort of scenario secure. It's another risk in common with all the other risks and organizational and operational risks that exist for running a building. And so security people will frequently tell you it's difficult to do. Organizations potentially, if they want to drive people back into buildings, will complain that it's impossible to allow people to have a hybrid thing. It's about having an open mind and saying, okay, there is how do we best, asking the question of an expert, how do we solve this problem? Because it is a solvable problem, and it's a problem that has been solved in the past. So I don't know if that answers your question from a pure technical point of view, but it's like, understand this problem can be solved. The question is to understand what the risk of the occupiers are. So back to ask the question, is it a risk you care about? Is it something? And then you can figure out a solution for it.
Indeed. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, and as ever, it's always good to reflect on the kind of the effect that the changes in the way we use real estate have radically reshaped the business world in the last few years. So for today, Gwilym, thanks ever so much for your time. It's been fascinating to talk, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
And thanks for inviting me, Andrew. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure.